Well, hello, listeners. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to the very first episode of the Double Take podcast. This is your co host, Alex Molinas.
And I'm your other co-host, Andrew Molinas. We're a pair of identical twin brothers who both love movies, and we're sharing this space together even though you and I live miles apart in Southern California. And like I said, we just love movies, and so we decided to create this podcast to talk about movies.
Andrew, would you like to share the movie that we've selected for our first episode?
For sure, the first movie that we are going to be talking about is the movie Fire Island. I'm really excited to talk about this movie with you, Alex,
Yeah,
because
same.
I think it's very timely right now. Happy Pride Month, by the way. It's
Yeah,
June.
happy Pride Month.
Happy Pride Month, and I think it's timely that we are talking about an LGBTQ plus movie as our first episode during Pride Month.
Yeah, I think it's very apt.
Just to give you a heads up, we are going to be unpacking this movie, which means that we are going to be spoiling
Yeah.
it. So, spoiler alert, if you
Yeah.
haven't seen the movie and you don't want to be spoiled, just pause this episode right now, watch the movie, and then come back to this. Fire Island is a film that came out straight to Hulu, so it was never released in theaters. It was released on streaming back in, it's a 2022 film, I believe, right, Alex? It came
Yeah.
out in 2022. And it centers around a group of gay friends who go on a week-long vacation to an island in New York called Fire Island. And it wasn't until I saw this movie, Alex, that this is actually a real island.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I didn't know that this island existed until I saw the movie. But
Right,
yeah,
right.
after watching the movie, I would describe Fire Island as kind of the West Hollywood of New York.
West Hollywood and LA. And
Yeah.
yeah, and then if you're in San Diego, well, again, I've never been to Fire Island, but I would imagine it's the Hillcrest of New York.
Yeah. So it's basically the gayborhood,
The neighborhood
essentially.
of New
Yeah.
York. So the film takes place on Fire Island, and like I said, it centers around a group of gay friends who take a week-long vacation there, and it's actually their last vacation in Fire Island because their friend who owns a house out there actually has to sell it because she's broke. So they make that week-long vacation. They make the most of that week-long vacation, and they just have a grand time. But I think that what is great about this movie is that there's definitely a lot of social commentary about the gay community, and we'll go ahead and dive right into that in just a moment. But just to give a little bit of more context about this movie, it's really important that I mention important characters in this movie because as we're going to be talking about different scenes, I think it's just important for the audience to know which characters we're referencing.
Yeah.
So I think there's about five characters that we should introduce. So there's the character Noah, played by Joel Kim Booster. He's the comedian in real life. There's Howie, who plays Noah's friend. No, Howie is played by Bowen Yang. And then there's Will, played by Conrad Ricamora. Will plays the potential love interest of Noah. And then there's Charlie. Charlie is Howie's love interest. And then there's a supporting character named Cooper, who's Charlie's friend.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that I'm missing, Alex?
No, I think those are pretty much the characters that I feel like we're going to highlight in this episode. Before we go into the film a bit deeper, I think it's also worth noting just how this movie was received critically and by audiences. So on Rotten Tomatoes, Fire Island got a 94% certified fresh tomato out of 112 reviews, professional critic reviews. And that's a really high score. Obviously, it's certified fresh. A high A.
Right.
And then for the audience score, so non-professional critics, just the day-to-day audience members, the percentage was 67%. So those are both pretty solid scores for this film. And what these scores tell me as a person is that this movie did resonate with audiences. It did speak to audiences. And so that's one of the reasons why we picked this film, because not only does it have a lot to say about the gay community, but the fact that it was well received and by professional critics and moderately well received by audience members, we do think that it's worth just talking about on this podcast.
Right. And I think that some of what this movie touched upon definitely hits close to home. You and I are identify as members of the community. We do both identify as gay. And I
Yeah,
think
gay
that
Asian men.
yeah, we're both gay Asian men.
I think it's really apt to introduce an article that you and I stumbled across
Hmm.
on CNN. Joel Kim Booster is the writer of the movie. He also stars in the movie as well. But there was an interview on CNN, and I really liked what he mentions in this interview. He basically mentions that Fire Island is a movie that's about class struggle in the gay community from the perspective of Asian gay men. And it's interesting because it's true that in the gay community, there is this form of classism where, absent any straight people in the community, there is this sense of social hierarchy that we see.
Right.
That just like how we see social hierarchy in the rest of the world, that has nothing to do with sexual orientation. Um, and more specifically in the gay community, we see class struggle based on race, gender, body type, and socioeconomic status. And that's exactly what the social commentary that this movie has.
For those who are listening, we'll go ahead and put the link of the CNN article in the show notes. But I just really like how Joel Kim Booster talks about how in this film, you really just see how in a place like Fire Island, where it's all LGBTQ plus folk, all queer folks, where there's really no straight people, we just see that there's other forms of marginalization and oppression that happens
Hmm.
within our own community. And especially
Yeah.
if it's a community that's been historically oppressed in a straight world.
Yeah, it's very ironic, isn't it?
It
That
is,
a
yeah.
community that's all
Yeah.
about inclusion and fighting for inclusion in a heteronormative world, within the community, there's a lot of exclusion.
Right, right. And that's actually my first question to you, Alex. Circling back to Joel Kim Booster's comment about the gay community and how queer folks find ways to oppress one another, it boils the question, where do you think that comes from and why do you think that happens?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I think for me, maybe because our community has been so historically marginalized and oppressed that we have this sense of wanting to feel powerful in our community. And the only way to do that is by creating this artificial social hierarchy where
Mhm.
there tends to be one group above the other. What do you think, bro?
I think I agree with what you're saying. Just to add to that, I'm thinking that we see it in other marginalized groups. And I know that I've had conversations about this with some of my colleagues at work. We've talked about how in racially minoritized groups, there is also colorism that occurs within those marginalized communities. So,
Hmm,
for
interesting.
example, if you're lighter skinned or you're considered to be white passing, you're more socially desirable than someone in your community that's more darker skinned. So
Hmm.
perhaps that is not so much different compared to how gay men or how queer folk in the community find ways to oppress one another. And I
Yeah,
know that
interesting.
is something that Noah at the beginning of this movie does reference. It's at the beginning of the movie. I'm sure you remember, Alex. It was the opening scene on the ferry
Oh
where
yeah.
Noah, Joel Kim Booster's character, and his friends. So Howie and his friends, they all get on the ferry, and as they're departing to go to Fire Island, the voiceover of Noah, he talks about how there is social hierarchies in the gay community.
Hmm.
And I remember he said something along the lines of he goes, "Oh, in our community, money isn't the only form of currency.
Hmm.
There's race, abs, masculinity." And he talks about how those are just different characteristics that gay folk tend to use as metrics to separate ourselves from like into upper class and lower
Yeah. So
classes.
it's that social hierarchy based on those different characteristics. I guess like that's another question that I have for you, bro. What elements of this movie really spoke to you as a gay Asian man?
I think that I may have a long-winded answer to that, but just to start
Hmm.
us off, initially, what really spoke to me about this movie is just how it showed the different microaggressions that gay Asian men can face in the community. For those of you who don't know what microaggressions are, they're subtle, unintentional, behavioral, or environmental slights that show hostile, derogatory, or negative attitudes about or towards individuals based on their race, culture, or gender, or other aspects of their identity. So
Mhm.
it's just comments that are somewhat like racist, or they show a negative bias towards Asians.
Yeah.
Right.
Hmm.
Oh, in this case, it's Asians. For example, there was the scene they first got to the island, and then they were at a bar, and then there was that the white gay guy
Yeah,
that
yeah,
goes
yeah.
up to that goes up to Noah, and he asks, "Oh, are you Korean? Oh, you're Korean. I have a feeling."
Yeah, yeah. Always like, oh, you look Filipino. Are you Filipino?
Right. Will, Rickamora's character, comes into the picture, and then I think that's when that one white gay guy goes, "Oh, are you Filipino? You strike me as someone who's Filipino."
Yeah.
So that was one scene. That was one
Yeah.
scene
There's
that,
another scene too.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it was at the beginning where I think the scene cuts to a flashback where Noah, Joel Kim Booster's character, and then Howie, Bone Ying's character, are servers at a restaurant. And
Yeah.
then as they're walking around doing their duties, there was a diner. You hear a diner in the background go, "Oh, yo, Jackie Chan."
Yeah. Just because he's Asian.
Yeah, you can call him Jackie Chan.
Yeah.
And of course there's other scenes like I know at the end when Charlie's ex references Howie and says, "Oh, you really think that Charlie is gonna go after that Asian guy?"
Yeah. Hmm. No, no, no. I completely agree with you. Because I do think that there is like a negative bias towards Asians in the gay community. That I'm speaking from my perspective. I've always felt Asian men are the black sheep in the gay community. Like they're
The
considered the
least
least
desirable.
desirable. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, and there's like one particular scene that kind of highlights that. It's when they're at the club and Cooper and Noah were in the bathroom, and then Cooper mentions that he likes Will, which is the character played by Conrad Ricamora,
Mhm.
and Cooper says, you know, I'm not normally into that kind of guy. But then Noah says, like, what kind of guy? Like an Asian guy? Like he basically calls him out on it.
hmm
And I
No, I
believe,
thought that scene was so funny because I know Cooper was using a urinal next to an Asian guy when
oh
Noah
yeah,
asked him that question when he
yeah.
goes, Not into what kind of guy? An Asian guy?" And then you just see Cooper lock eyes with the Asian guy next to him using a urinal, and then he gets all embarrassed. He
Yeah,
goes,
he's
"Oh
like,
my
"Oh
God,
my
no, I
God,
did not say that. You said
you said
that. You're
that."
projecting on me."
Yeah, but then again, that scene highlights that undesirability that other gay men usually tend to have towards Asian gay
Yeah.
men.
Right, right.
Um,
But it's not just that too, and I don't know if I don't recall the movie ever referencing this or ever mentioning it, but in real life it's not just the fact that Asian men are perhaps the least, or they're perceived to be the least desirable in terms of attractiveness among other gay men, but when there are, then there's a term for that. Especially when it comes to gay men who are white and are that like Asians or that want to get with Asians, they're called rice queens.
Yeah, no, those are really good points, bro. And another thing I want to highlight too is that it's not only race that is part of this social hierarchical structure, but there's also socioeconomic status and there's also body type. We haven't really talked about that yet. Do you have anything to say to that?
Right, circling back to the opening scene on the ferry when
Yeah.
Noah, his narration voice talks about how money isn't the form of currency. There's abs masculinity. I know that, it does cut to, different gay folks on the ferry, and some of them were more fit than the other, or some that appeared to be more masculine than the other. And then
Hmm.
of course, Noah, he's shirtless in there, and then he does convey the more masculine fit type.
Masculine fit
And
type.
then
Yeah.
Noah's friend, who's clearly from a bigger body type, he goes, "Why are you conforming to this community's toxic body standards?"
Yeah, and then Noah responds with, whatever, I'm still invisible to most of these people anyway. And then another part of the friend group says, yeah, no fats, no femmes, no Asians. Noah, you're still two out
Hmm.
of the three, baby. That sequence, Andrew, definitely reflects the classism in the gay community that
Right.
if you're fat or you're effeminate or you're Asian, if you're any of those three or all of those three, then you're at the bottom of the totem pole.
The
You're
bottom of the
the
totem
lower
pole.
social class.
Yeah, that phrase, I've heard that phrase in real life. It is a phrase that has been used in the community before. We've seen it in the apps. I think that was such a pivotal scene in the movie. And I'm wondering if the reason why Noah works so hard to be fit and masculine is that he would be more socially desirable.
Hmm.
And we can even see the stark contrast between him and his friend Howie,
Yeah,
right? Who
yeah,
there's Howie where, he's also Asian, just like Noah, but by comparison, he's actually not the fit type, and he's
yeah.
not the
He's not
most
in that
masculine
shape.
type
Yeah.
compared to Noah.
Yeah, and that body type contrast is definitely highlighted in that scene near the end where Howie gets mad at Noah for thinking that they were both the same, when in
Mhm,
reality they aren't. It's like, yeah, we're both Asian, but you're more fit than I am. So stop acting like we're the same. Like you can get any guy that you want, while
mhm.
me, I'm struggling to find one.
Yeah, that was a great scene, and I'm glad that
Yeah.
you mentioned that, Alex, because I think that's all was also important to note is that even though there are two gay Asian men in the same room, their experiences could be much different from each other based on
The
other
body
parts
type.
of their identity
Yeah.
or other parts of them as people. And I know that we've talked about intersectionality,
Yeah.
how we have other varying identities that shape our overall experience, and so that's what differentiated Howie and Noah's experiences as gay Asian men is that one was more fit than the other. So of course that's gonna shape their different experiences. Where
Hmm.
Noah can get any guy he wants versus Howie, who's not as fit or masculine, may not and may have
Hmm.
trouble. And I think that's why that was a big part of the plot. Noah was trying to help
Howie.
his friend
Yeah.
Howie get with someone on Fire Island.
Hmm.
I know that the movie also touches upon socioeconomic status.
Yeah.
Alex, did you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. So in the movie, we definitely see that there's a lot of integration between race and socioeconomic status, and it's readily apparent in a lot of the scenes in Fire Island. We see that when Noah and his friends and his group of friends, when they attend a party, there's a lot of people at that party who are fit, who are white, and who are rich. It's readily apparent that they're very affluent because the house is really nice.
Right.
And in the scene as well, when they go to the party, the voiceover of Noah, he says, a lot of people think you have to be successful, white, and rich with 7% body fat to vacation on Fire Island. Those people are at this party. And
Mhm.
again, the scene is full of these fit white men in really
Wearing
good shape. They're wearing
speedos or
thongs.
thongs.
And there's just a sense of classism because when Noah and his friends finally go into the house, there's someone on the staircase that says, I think you have the wrong house. Just based on the way they look, because they're Asian and they don't look very affluent.
Yeah, and then they
Um,
don't look maybe with the exception of Noah, they weren't the most fit or they weren't the most masculine presenting.
yeah. And I wonder if that there is an association between that, between fitness and wealth. If you tend to be affluent, you tend to be healthier and more fit.
I mean, it would make sense that the more money you have, the more that you have to invest in your health.
Yeah, and if
Hmm.
you do happen to be wealthy but not white, the movie does show that there is that sense of bias towards wealth because Conrad Rickamore's character, Will, he is part of that group because
Hmm.
he's Asian, but he is a really rich, successful lawyer.
Hmm.
So he tends to be okay in that group.
I don't know if this scene in the movie was meant to be funny, but as you were talking about that, I thought about that scene between Noah, Joel Kim Booster's character, and Will Conrad Rickamore's character. Where they were both in the forest, and it was like raining.
Oh yeah, yeah, the fight scene.
The fight scene, and I thought, oh my god, of course that happens. Of course, the two characters that are potentially interested in each other as they're arguing, it's raining. And I'm like, that's
Yeah.
such a typical trope in a romantic comedy. I think that that scene does touch on classism based on socioeconomic status because
Hmm.
Noah, who's lower class, and then he's in stark contrast with Will, who's upper class. Noah does call him out and say, "Oh yeah, you think you're better than me, all smug and judgmental and elitist because you're like you super rich, you're a successful lawyer." And then of
Hmm.
course Will says, "Oh, you make such big like assumptions here. You really think I'm better than you?"
Yeah,
I think that's what I really liked about this movie, Alex, that it does show the issues that occur in the gay community. And it's
yeah,
something that I don't think that is often talked about because when it
yeah,
comes to the queer community, we always talk about how we are a marginalized community that has been trying to fight for acceptance and equal rights
yeah,
over the years in a predominantly heteronormative society. And
yeah,
then no one really talks about the inherent issues that are also prevalent just within
yeah.
our own community. And I think this movie does touch upon that.
Yeah, and we have Joel Kim Booster to thank for that, and hopefully
Right.
there are more movies out there in the future that will tackle this issue.
And I don't know if you've ever experienced this, Alex, but I noticed that whenever I talked to my straight friends about issues that I'm just noticing in the gay community,
Yeah,
obviously for the reasons that we've talked about, I've heard straight people in my life go, "Oh, well, that happens everywhere. That happens in the straight community."
yeah.
And for some reason, when they say that, I go,
I get
"Okay, I'm not
annoyed.
saying that what you're saying isn't true. I just feel like they don't exactly get
Yeah,
it."
and it makes things so much more complicated too because they think that the issues are the same in the straight community, but I beg to differ. I think there are unique challenges in the gay community, and it makes the challenges of being gay even harder. The challenges of being gay are one, being different and being and fighting for acceptance in a heteronormative world.
Hmm.
Two, the fact that our community is super small, so our search for a romantic partner and having relationships are inherently complicated because of that.
We have
And three,
slim
we have
pickings.
unique challenges in the gay community that the straight community may not necessarily understand.
Hmm.
And to your point, bro, when we're talking about this with our straight counterparts, even though they're so well intentioned, they say that, oh, this issue happens in the
Hmm.
straight community too. It just becomes being gay harder because there's no sense of understanding.
Right, right.
Yeah,
And for the record, I know that we'll probably have listeners on this podcast episode who are straight and are allies. We're not trying to alienate any of them. We love our straight allies.
yeah,
Obviously, it goes back to again, just differences in lived experience, right? Of course, there are things that our straight allies may not get because their lived experiences as straight people is can be different compared to the lived experiences of someone who's queer. So
well,
I honestly, Alex, I think we've definitely did a lot of unpacking here. As we wrap up here, the main social commentary that's centered around this movie is once again when you remove straight oppression from the picture and we just focus solely on the queer community, we just start seeing how it may not always be as inclusive and accepting as people outside of the community may think, that there's still other forms of repression based on
yeah,
these artificial social hierarchies that we've created for ourselves that we use to oppress one another, and it creates this class struggle based off of
hmm,
race, gender, masculinity, and socioeconomic
socioeconomic
status.
status. Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure there's a lot more to talk about, so who knows, maybe just depending on how this plays out, we might have to do a second part on this movie.
Yeah, for all the listeners out there, if you have anything to add too, feel free to message us and let us know your thoughts.
Before we sign off, Alex, I think it's also just worth mentioning, and it's really what I'm saying is directed towards anyone who's listening here. Just keep in mind that a lot of what we're saying is just a matter of opinion. It's just based off of how we interpreted the movie. So if there's anything that we said that you either agree with or may not agree with, we're looking forward to hearing your thoughts. So, feel free to message us or leave your comments. But we really look forward to including you in this conversation.
Yeah, so if you enjoyed what you were listening to, listeners, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button and make sure to follow us on Instagram. Our Instagram username is doubletakepodcast_1. As Andrew mentioned earlier in the podcast episode, we will post a link to that CNN article that Joel Kim Booster was referenced in the show notes.
We'll also put other links in the show notes as well.
All right, folks, that's a wrap.
That's a wrap.